My name is Luke Gleason. The feature film that we've put together is called DÄNE, INJETL, The Scattering of Man. It's my directorial debut, and it's Messelinka Films' first production as a group.
Yeah, my name's Tim Cote. I've been working with Luke now for about a decade, and I was the director of photography on this film. Amongst many other things, we were quite a small crew, but yeah, happy to be here.
And we'll get to more of that. My name is Marina Hanna, and this is the filmmaker Q&A for The Scattering of Man. Thank you for joining us today. I know for Luke and Tim, you're both in somewhat remote locations, and I'd like to get to that as well, if you can tell us where you are. So this is we're really pleased that you could join us from, and Luke, can let us know where you are.
So I'm on a login road just outside of Fort St. James, British Columbia, and I was rushing into town to make it to the call. I fell a little short, so I apologize for the background information, but we're essentially about an hour, 45 minutes northwest of Prince George right now.
I'm 2/3 of the way up Vancouver Island in Canada here, and on the East Coast on a little tidal slough called the Puntledge. And yeah, it's not raining, so that's sweet.
It just so happens to be a rainy day here in Toronto, at least when we're recording this. But let's get into it. You had talked about, Tim, when you introduced yourself, that you did more than just be the director of photography for this film. And I wanted to know if you can each answer this question. We could start with you, Luke. When did you first get the idea for the film, and when did you bring in Tim?
So I met Tim through a mutual friend. I've been wanting to tell this story for a very long time. And my previous role of director of lands and resources and treaty operations for Seike, I mean, said that they're ready to tell the story. So it's really, and so it's the first time that we've ever told from our side about what happened when they flooded massive logging truck, when they flooded the Williston Reservoir in the 60s. So we've sort of had a silent history on this for a very, very long time. So I felt just really privileged that they came to me and wanted me to put this project together. And Tim and I just sort of met organically through our friend who's also a filmmaker as well. And it was just a passion project from the beginning. And it's a unique film because it's 100% funded by our nation. And so it felt really good to have that support, you know, moving this project forward. So working with Tim and Eve, we just developed a really close relationship and started wanting to make more films. So that's where we're kind of at right now. And we're just happy to finally get this thing out the door. We've been working for quite a long time. So we're there now.
I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but I want to know, Tim, what attracted you to the project?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to begin with, I had done some stuff with our mutual friend up in the Northwest Territories in Canada, and downstream of like all of Fort McMurray oil sands, which is a big oil sands operation in Canada. And we had worked with on a few different short documentaries that were only to be seen in court, basically to help with different things like land use claims and stuff. And they proved to be very successful. They kind of replaced these 350-page documents that no one read. And him and I got to talking after I think the third one we did, and I just said, you know, like, there's no shortage of stories across, especially northern Canada right now, and especially in the Indigenous realm. It's always felt like a voice that hasn't, in my opinion, had a lot of like footing to get out there and facilitation. And I just said, you know, like, why not do this if it's working in the courts, but like on a public level, and try to get a feature-length story off the ground, and really get it into the festival circuit, you know, just try to get it out there and see what kind of interest is around that, because it was positive all around on the legal side, but also communities just even telling us some of the stories that we were talking about up there. And then, yeah, it just so happened he talked to Luke, I think a couple of years later from that. And that's where the ball started rolling. And I did some research based on those initial calls, and it just seemed like, definitely seemed like something to really try and sink our teeth into.
I think that's important too. What Tim is saying is like the whole idea was we just wanted to tell a story, not for any other reason than just to get the story out there. So we really focused on just letting the story breathe. It was a really difficult editing process because you want to tell everything. But, you know, right from the get-go, Tim and them were right on board with sort of that spirit. So we've just tried to tell that story in a way that, you know, provides dignity to my people from what they kind of went through, and also see the beauty in what we're really fighting for up north, which is the country and our territory. And it's where we live, and it's where we're gonna be buried. And my auntie makes that pretty clear in the film. So it was a tough time sometimes pulling the story out when you're close to it, but also doing it from a lens where you're just trying to keep the story, like the spirit of the story, alive.
Luke, am I correct in saying that it took you 5 years to complete this film?
We might have been a little bit north of 5 years. The editing process was probably the longest. We had 5 shoots. We had like 30 terabytes of film. I was told that there's more to a film than B-roll, but the territory is such a strong character in the film, and it's something that we've always been sort of working with. You know, traditionally and culturally, that's how we identify. That's why they call us Sikh and DÄNE people, because we're people of the mountains. So the difficult part was in the editing room of how do we do this in a way that we're like, doing justice to the sort of the greater story without leaving too much out, and ensure that people's voices are heard.
And anyone who's watching this right now has already watched the film, so you know how beautifully it was photographed, and that's Tim's work. And Tim, how did you approach this, and what were you trying to convey in your cinematography?
Yeah, I guess on a more general level, we approached it as I'm a non-Indigenous person and did not want to go into this project in any way with my opinion affecting the real goal, which was a community telling their own story, which is hard and different from a lot of stuff that I do and have done, you know, trying to create an objective, like visually within that is also in the same crux, right? Like I didn't want to portray people in a way, even visually, or the territory, especially because that's really our main character, that was my intentions placed on something that we wanted to be a conveyance of their stories. So yeah, I guess to answer the cinematography aspect of it also hits on every other aspect of it. Like we never did an interview without like Luke being there and directing it, and like the story. We never sat anyone down on really even a scheduled interview. It was more we would spend time with people. When it started to feel organic, we would set the cameras up and kind of start rolling. But from the cinematography like perspective, my main objective was like, how do we not feel intrusive? And that took a couple of shoots, honestly. And yeah, also, you know, just from a stylistic perspective, we knew we wanted to go in and like do all statics with the territory. You notice like there's not even very many pans. There's not, definitely no zooms. There's not much of a moving camera throughout the whole film. And especially with the territory, that was always a goal from the beginning. We thought like, we didn't want to try and give it a voice that it couldn't give itself. And in the static imagery, it allowed us also to always have that pad to hold shots really long. But it also, I think our goal when we brought that into the editing process as well was just like letting everything breathe, because that's the pace of life up there. And that was the pace that people showed us within our interviews, and even just the time we spent with them, that was truest to them. So that's how we decided to shoot. I guess from like our biggest goal was that static imagery and letting things breathe and speak for itself.
Luke, aside from the contemporary images that you present, there's a lot of archival footage in this film that I'm sure took a lot of work to source and to assemble together. Why did you go that route of showcasing the archival footage?
Well, that was a really difficult one because there's not a lot of archival footage about our people. So we had they had very little to work with from the beginning. But I wanted to give some sort of sense of how kind of close it was. So like the archival footage, it looks dark, it looks grainy, but it was filmed in the 60s. It wasn't that long ago. So that part of the story is actually close to us. And that's really like the earliest archival footage we have. Everything else that we have in that story is BC Hydro footage. It's stuff that tells their story, but it also kind of illustrates that pristine environment that was there before the flood. I apologize for these trucks, but there wasn't really any other way to give people a sense of what was actually happening back then, because we had no roads until the logging started to clear way for the reservoir. There wasn't a single road in the country. So that early archival stuff that you see in the film and the final product, that's really the only archival footage that we know exists anywhere. And we worked really hard to get that. And we had conversations with CBC for a very, very long time to try to show them, because we used so much in the beginning of the film. I wanted the first half of the film to feel completely different than the second half. So the first one, we have the archival, we have sort of that stepping back into a part of the story. And then the last 3 acts of the film is really just all open shots of the territory and sort of where we're at right now. But we tried to do it in a way that you realize that this wasn't very long ago, that it was just an untamed wilderness with a bunch of people that, didn't even know what a vehicle was in some cases, So that's, to me, one of the parts of the story that's just, people don't really realize that this is recent. This technology and these sort of developments, they're all very recent in our history.
And it really does become about the people as we move on in the film. And I want to know, how did you decide on who you were going to showcase and who you were going to interview in this film?
Yeah, so that was kind of difficult because, like Tim said, it takes a number of shoots. Like, I mean, I'm from Seke. We didn't really start to get that sense until probably the second or third shoot, where, okay, these people really want to be a part of it, they want to be committed. Some people, after a couple sort of interviews and shoots, decided they didn't really want to be a part of the story, but they wanted to definitely record their version of the story of what happened to them personally. So we're just documenting that, and we're keeping it in our archives for future generations. But we sort of just found out over time of, who really wants to tell their story, who's comfortable with it. We just left it really open. We didn't want to push on anybody's story. So some of the stuff that came out in the film was pretty emotional, because we know it was hard for people to tell those parts of their life, especially in front of us. And they don't know who's going to watch the film. So, it was it was a really difficult process in some days when we were doing that. But by the third shoot, we had everybody on board. And pretty much everybody who's in the film, the final product, by the third shoot, they were all 100% on board with being comfortable enough in front of the camera. Knowing Tim, knowing Eve, they spent a lot of time up in Seke just getting to know people without turning the camera on. So that's sort of how we ended up anyways with those final cast of characters that you see in the film, was really through that long process of just allowing people to let their own story breathe.
Tim, for somebody who's coming from outside the nation and then spending so much time in the land and the territory, is there a memory or maybe a visual, since that's how you were viewing the story? Is there something that remains with you, or something transformative that made you think differently after this experience?
Well, maybe Tim can have from his perspective, and I'll jump in later, just because with me being from there, the story is pretty close. So I know by the end of the process, Tim and Eve were very close to the story, and they really respected what people were sharing with them. But for me, I mean, I have my own story related to it that I don't tell in the film, that, Tim and Eve know just on a personal level. But I know that there's a lot of people as well with stories, you know, like we were very, very heavily impacted. Between that and the residential schools, we had a lot of displacement. So for me, that was the toughest part is, you know, this is a part of my story and I'm trying to do it justice in a way where I'm not putting my own spin on things. I'm not kind of jumping in. So for me, sort of probably the memorable moments are just seeing people's honesty and truth. People I've known, you know, my grandfather telling you stuff that's, you know, is really, really difficult to say. And, you know, being able to find the courage to do it. So those parts for me were most memorable just because, you know, some of the editing process was pretty painful for me. It was hard to sit in that chair. So I'm gonna get a little misty thinking about it, you know. But that was for me probably the most memorable part. It was just the difficulty thinking objectively about the story and not inserting myself.
Yeah, there were many things that like changed different thought processes with me for sure. It's interesting because, you know, like Luke mentioned, it was more or less three of us, myself, Luke, and Eve, who was the editor, but he was also on every single shoot. And time-wise, like with the film, when we started, Luke had a daughter who was, I guess, 5 at the time. Myself and Eve had no kids. And then by the time the editing process was done, I had 2 and Eve had a kid. So that's an interesting timeline throughout being so like fully immersed in this film. And that also kind of followed an interesting trajectory with what really stuck with me being up there was like the patience and the pace, especially when you know, you're trying to get shots, you're trying to like visualize what this is going to become, especially such a complex story. You know, it was definitely evolving and we wanted to let it evolve and try to really narrow down what it was going to look like on the timeline in the end. But the patience that is forced upon you, being that remote, being in a community that, like I said, we didn't schedule any interviews. It wouldn't have worked even if we tried, you know. But that patience of like even times being like, okay, this is like the perfect light, you know, it'd be epic to roll in this interview right now, but losing that mentality and adopting that like the light isn't what matters, it's the timing of what we get, was a big learning curve for me and something that has absolutely stuck with me, big time. And also the trust too, you know, it really meant a lot to me by like the 3rd shoot to have elders and community members like sharing stories with me completely off camera, but really like, you know, saying things that I think like internally needed a certain level of trust that I'm just like grateful I was given being up there for sure. And just the nature is another one too. You know, we were up there all 4 seasons, and
Oh,
you
wow.
know, I've spent a lot
Yeah.
of my life being pretty remote in British Columbia, doing different shoots and things, but it's a different level of remoteness up there for sure where we were, and that's something that you can't help but be affected by for sure, or I couldn't.
Luke, one of the themes of our short films program is generation to generation and how stories continue. And one person's story actually starts, you know, before you're born and continues after. And this film strikes me in the same kind of way. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, when he met my daughter, she was just a little kid, you know, she's gonna be 14 here in December. When he met her, it was like 10 years ago. And she has her own story and her own connection to me, like her father, and her own connection to the land in her own way, how she like perceives things, right? So when we started telling the story, I felt like I was teaching her a lot. And then by the end of it, you know, I wasn't sure if it was mine anymore or if it ever was, you know. It was just, it's a part of a bigger thread, especially how our people, like Tim mentioned, we live really remote, you know. I rushed out here from moose hunting to jump on this call, and you know, we drove 5 hours down a dirt road to get here, and we just do that every day, so we don't really think about it. And our kids do that now. They have their own things that they're interested in, and they have their own perceptions of how things happened and why we are certain ways and this and that. So it definitely connected with me for sure, where I just kind of felt like, well, yeah, I don't know if this ever was my story. You know, I'm just a part of a bigger thing. And, you know, my job is just to, you know, do what I can now and then remove myself and leave it in their hands. And they're totally capable of carrying it on without me. And so that's the next step. You know, I'll slowly move out and they'll move in and they'll carry the story in their own way. And that's sort of where we're at with the film. We finished this thing. We came in, like Tim said, the amount of patience. Some of the best interviews we had, we didn't have light. We were sitting in somebody's house. Like we're sitting with my grandpa while he's chain smoking and telling us all this crazy stuff. And we're like, I wish we could just be outside and have a beautiful shot, but we're sitting in there because that's just how it happened. And so we just enjoyed that process and let it happen, knowing that we're never going to put that in the film. Probably it just doesn't fit with what we're trying to build in terms of the look of the film and the feel. But they're opening it up to us, so we take the time. We took the time, and now that stuff will be recorded, and future generations can watch it. They can learn, you know, from our elders in a different medium than the way that we learned. You know, like we learned from word of mouth. And but we have a library of stories now that we recorded through this whole process, and it's pretty special, you know, when you're coming from, you know, somewhere else and you maybe know nothing about a culture, and to have somebody open up for like 3 hours and tell you all these amazing things, it's a pretty special moment. And it's you know, I'm just happy that Tim and Eve got to be a part of that story as well, and now they have their own way of carrying it on. So
We started off the discussion by saying, you were saying you just wanted to tell a story and you wanted this story to be out there. And now you have the story out there, and you even have these additional interviews that you said are becoming part of a library for you and for your people. Do you have an idea now that the story is out there, who should see this story, or who would you like to see this film?
well, I did a private screening in Seke for everybody who was involved in the film, just to make sure that we weren't showing something to people that they weren't comfortable with. So if we had to do any changes or edits, that, you know, we weren't sort of stepping outside of that level of comfort where we're maybe, you know, deciding what people are going to say for the story. And a bunch of my aunties all came up to me after screening, and they all came up to me in a little group, and I thought maybe they're going to tell me that they didn't feel comfortable with this or that, and we're going to have to go back to the editing and do some changes. And they just said, we just able to tell the story now that we've got, because we're ready. And so I said, okay, well, I'll do my best to get it out there. And so with our people now, they're just, I think it's a part of our healing process, is to be able now to just say, this happened. We want to move forward. We want to move forward in a healthy and a strong way. And we just want to be able to move past this thing. And like I said, there's the dignity of the people. You know, we wanted to make sure that we were protecting that when we did this. So the aunties sort of gave us a stamp of approval to say, no, it's time, get it out to as many people as possible. So we hope that anybody who's interested just in any sort of story related to whatever their own personal life, that they can maybe have connection to this, because every different nation in this country has a different story. And we have a lot of similarities in our stories. Everybody has a unique voice and a way that they want to, you know, tell their own truths. And so if there's people out there that maybe have never heard of DÄNE, maybe they've never heard of these massive hydro projects, and they don't really realize that the direct impact that they really had on people's lives. Anybody who's sort of interested in just even seeing the beauty of the territory in a part of the world that, you know, we think is God's country, you know, anybody that wants to see that, you know, I would like them to, yeah, be able to, you know, have this opportunity to watch it and just sort of really see that this is a special part of the world to us, and we're doing our best to keep it together, but we're also trying to keep ourselves together as a family. And this, I think, is a healing point for a lot of people.
That's I think, a great way to wrap it up. But before we do, I wanted to give you each a chance to say something that maybe wasn't said in these last few minutes.
I just want to say thank you to the nation for like really pushing to make this happen in a way where they got behind the film, and we didn't have to go out there and source funds. I just, like Tim and Eve and all these guys that came on board, we've become really good friends with, and people hold them in high regard because of the way that they, carried themselves. And, so I'm just really happy that the nation did that. And I think that it's important for people to do that. And I just hope to see, like, if this film can kind of like, maybe some other nations, realize that, just a little bit of hard work of putting something together and moving it forward. If there's a healing piece in that for people, then I'd like to see them do that. And if in some way we can sort of ignite that in some other people and realize that, you can go and do this. I'm traditionally a musician by trade. I've been a director of lands and resources. I've been chairman of the board of an economic development corporation. I've run businesses. I've started businesses. And I was definitely not a filmmaker. Now I got the little bug because
You are
I
now.
think it's beautiful, but we were able to go out there. Yeah, we were able to go out and do it. And that's something special to me. So it's definitely something I don't take for granted. So sort of for my closing remarks, I definitely want to thank the nation, the people, and Tim and Eve and everybody who was on board who just wanted to get the story out there. So thank you.
Well said, and very in line with what I would say is same. Big thank you to the nation for trusting and taking the risk of doing something like this, and Luke for everything he did to put the effort in. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure how obvious it is in the film, or it depends maybe like how a viewer took it, which you never really know. But I do think it's worth saying that like what the nation did as far as taking the risk to do this and commission an entire feature-length doc with the premise only being like we want to tell our own story. I think it's worth being said that, from my opinion, I have a huge amount of respect for that. I also know that that hasn't been done very much at all, especially with Indigenous communities in Canada. And yeah, I'd like to say thanks for having that vision and taking that risk. And for what it's worth too, I think if it's not obvious, that is not a small risk or undertaking. And I really respect that.
Thank you both very much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think I really hope people are watching this after the film. It really adds value.
Well, yeah, thank you for inviting us, and we're looking forward to getting the film out there. And I apologize for all the background logging trucks. We're gonna head back. We did it. We're gonna head back into the bush now, and hopefully get a nice 2 to 3 year old moose and get some meat for the family.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it, and it was fun to talk through.
Yeah, I almost want to talk more about. I've been in front of a screen all day. I find your lives far more exciting right now than sitting in Toronto.
Yeah, you guys must be busy. Well, good luck with the festival too. I hope everything goes smoothly, and yeah, looking forward to tuning in on some other films too and checking them out.
Great. Yeah, we'd love to hear feedback if you have it.
Sure.
But yeah, we're really excited.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.